Texas starts tomorrow. So inshallah, if you guys could take some time out to go vote. Usually the early voting period, I think it's for a couple weeks, and it's like there's zero crowd when it comes to going into vote. I know at my place there was like 4 or 5 people there at a time. So if you want to save, yeah, you can go anywhere. Yes. Okay. Sufyan, mashallah, our resident expert, truly, he said that you can go to any polling location in your county. It doesn't have to be the one that's on the postcard that they mail you. Yeah, you can go to any one as long as it's in your county, inshallah. Okay. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa rasulullah. Alrighty. We will continue, inshallah, and go through what is now going to be like the last great moment, engagement or battle in the history of the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So last week we covered and we got up to the point of Fath Mecca, which we translated as the opening of Mecca, right? We translated as the opening because the word conquest in English has the connotation of some sort of military engagement, right? Some sort of conquest of an individual or a tribe or a people. But this was not a military conquest. This was an overtaking of a city that involved no bloodshed and involved no warfare, no fighting. And so after this time, something very interesting occurred to the believers. There was actually two things that were happening simultaneously. Number one is that you had the first phase of a large influx of people that were starting to accept the message of the Prophet ﷺ. We already talked about some of the notables. You know, we talked about Abu Sufyan. We talked about Ikramah ibn Abi Jahl. So we talked about these people who, them and their families and their city started now to accept the message of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So you had like large groups of new Muslims coming into the faith. And we're talking about like 1 week, 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks old in their faith. Very new. They were very familiar with the message in a certain light because they had engaged with the Prophet ﷺ over many years. But like we mentioned last week, one of their downfalls was that they never truly listened. So when they sat with him, Ikramah and Abu Sufyan and others, when they sat with him for the first time to hear his message, they actually didn't know exactly what it was, meaning that they were just fighting against him this entire time without actually knowing what it was they were disagreeing with. So they were very new. And when someone is very new to anything, right, when you first got your position at your job, at your role, there's a period of orientation that exists. Sometimes it's 1 day, sometimes it's a few days, sometimes it's like a few weeks, where the full workload, what's expected of you, the responsibility, even contractually, what's based in your contract, is not applied immediately, right? So you might have, for example, like your project lead or your team lead or your supervisor, they might kind of walk you through some of the processes or the steps or the procedures or whatever it is that you do, and then they might, forgive and overlook certain mistakes that you make. They might pardon some negligence here and there, but that's only for the first few weeks. And so in the initial introductory stage, the hearts of these believers, right, and this is a big lesson, the hearts of these new Muslims were so fresh to the message of Islam that actually dictates one of the major moments that we're going to talk about. Actually, a couple of them. There's two things today that we're going to talk about regarding that, okay? And this, in and of itself, is a very cohesive argument about how faith is something that has its own growth pace and own growth period. Because it's not like when people came to the Prophet ﷺ and accepted Islam, that all of a sudden now they had to be equal to Abu Bakr Siddiq, right? Like, oh, a person who just accepted Islam, now all of a sudden you have to be at par with Khadija, with Ali, with Aisha. Like, that's who you have to be. No, there was an understanding that in those early moments, there were going to be things that happened, mistakes that were made, right? Things that they had to learn. And even after learning, there were going to be moments where the learning had to set, kind of like when you pour cement, right? Or when you pour glue or any. There's a period where you need to let it set so it can dry. Otherwise, the function's never going to occur. So there were a couple things that happened during this period of Fath Mecca when the Muslims had opened the city of Mecca. This was after a long time in Medina of being on the defensive. This was a moment, a brief moment of what we can call for today's lesson prosperity. Right? What do I mean by prosperity? What does prosperity mean? Like if you're prospering, if something's prosperous, what is it? Yeah, like it's filled with success. It's good, like good things are happening, right? So if somebody's prospering, it means that they're positively growing, right? This Fath Mecca was something that the Muslims were kind of not used to, because they had opened up the city where the Kaaba was, where Masjid al-Haram was, and they had been now able to worship freely, make tawaf freely, pray freely. This was something that for 13 years, 20 years, they, even those who came from Mecca, they never had this kind of privilege. So there was a certain sense of prosperity that was felt that was not familiar to them. And what happens with prosperity, and this is natural with like every person, that when a person experiences a level of prosperity, they let their guard down, and their desperation, the feeling of desperation that they have for Allah, for most people, it can kind of start to wane, right? Imam Ghazali talks about this. He says your prayers are most powerful when you're in need, when you recognize your need. When a person recognizes how in need they are, that's when their prayers are the most powerful. But when their prayers are granted, right? And even Allah Ta'ala talks about this in the Quran, the person drowning at sea, right? The ship is, going to capsize and the person's drowning in the sea, and then they beg Allah, Allah save us. And if you save me, I'll do whatever it is that I've been neglecting this whole time. I'll pray and I'll do this, I'll do that. And then Allah saves that person and they forget about their promise. So this is a very human trait, right? It's not indicative of a person's weakness of faith, but it can be if it's habitual, if it's something that happens over and over again. So Allah Ta'ala, that's why we actually say in our faith tradition that every good thing that happens to you is also in its own way a test, right? Like we think of when I say God tests us, we instantly go back to the negative things. Like a flat tire is a test. An illness is a test. Losing a job is a test. These are all tests. But none of us would ever say like, oh, getting a job is a test, right? Getting a raise is a test. No one would ever categorize those things, but they are. Because everything is a test, because it's always testing how you respond to it. If something that I foresee as bad happens to me, and if how I respond to it is my test. If something good happens to me, I could start to become a lot more lax with my devotion to Allah. Maybe I was praying really hard for a job or a position or something, and now that Allah granted it to me, my prayers are no longer as focused. They're no longer as punctual. They're no longer as meaningful. So it's clear that that was a test. And actually, even though I got what I wanted, in a way I failed. Because the believer, when they're tested with harm, they go to Allah for protection. But when they're tested with goodness, they go back to Allah with what? With gratitude, with shukr, which means like renewed prayers. So these new Muslims, and also now with the Ansar, those from Medina, they were experiencing life in a way that they had never experienced before. They were able to walk around freely. They were able to worship freely. There was no challenge to their faith. There were some groups of people who now finally had decided, some tribes in the area that had decided that they wanted to mount like one basically final attack on the believers. They saw the downfall of the Quraysh as being like the last great sign that this was going to be the destruction of their tribal system as they knew it, of the system of their idolatry, all of that. So they became ultra concerned, very, very concerned. And this tribe was known as the Hawazin tribe. And what they did was they sent out a call to all of the, Bedouin tribal groups in Arabia, and they said that, look, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Muslims have conquered now Medina. This is not good, or Mecca. This is not good, because if anybody was supposed to, extinguish this group, it was going to be the Quraysh, and it didn't happen. So now this is our last chance, and they actually ended up gathering over 20,000 people. They ended up gathering 20,000 individuals that took it upon themselves to kind of fight this last stand against the Muslims. Now the Muslims, remember, they're riding high. They're in a very good place emotionally. They feel extremely happy, very, in a way, kind of carefree. So when they hear news that this is starting to happen, they start to prepare, but they have a certain sense of, I'm trying to figure out a good way to put this. It's not like arrogance or, cockiness or whatever we might call it. It's not, none of that. But they have a certain sense of, oh, this is already a done deal. Like, look at how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has just hooked us up from day one. Look at the Battle of Badr. We had nothing. Look at all these experiences. So they kind of became a little bit complacent with how they approached this new, very serious threat. And they started to think to themselves about what they had accomplished. And they started to think to themselves about, what the numbers they had, 12,000 people. I mean, even though the other tribe was 20,000, they had fought battles where they were outnumbered 3-1. They're like, dude, we got 12,000 people. Like, don't even, and we just completely, integrated all of Quraysh. We're good. We have nothing to worry about. And so they ended up meeting for battle in a place called Hunayn, which is close to both Mecca and also the area of Thaqif, where Ta'if, the city of Ta'if was, the people of Thaqif lived. And they ended up meeting there for battle. The Prophet ﷺ, again, he strategized and he wanted to come into this gathering at a early morning time so that the people who, they were trying to engage with would be not expecting them. So they come in, and again, remember, the general vibe of the community is a little bit complacent. So they come in, and they actually are attacked before they even realize it by like this down throw of arrows that they had never even seen before. And at this moment, they are completely in utter chaos. Everybody just starts scrambling wherever they can go. The Muslims just start running back. They start fleeing. This is something that we're not used to seeing. When it came to the rules of engagement, when it came to the moment of battle with the believers, we're not used to them like scrambling and chaos and running away. The only other time something like this happened, where an attack happened and the believers just kind of like lost all of their strategy, was in the Battle of Uhud, when the Prophet ﷺ was attacked directly, when they thought he was killed. So there was out of those 12,000 people, there was a moment in which the books of Sirah say that only a few of them, like 10, remained directly around the Prophet ﷺ. Everybody started to run. But the books of Sirah mention something really interesting about why this happened. Remember, we talked about before what? That there were a group of people that now integrated into the community. They're brand new in their faith. Okay? Now, it doesn't mean that their faith is bad. It doesn't mean that their faith is qualitatively any less. But what it means is that they don't have that firm foundation that takes time to develop, right? If I plant an apple tree in an orchard and there's 100 other fully grown apple trees that have been around for a decade, and I just planted a brand new one, if you asked me how many apple trees were there, I wouldn't tell you, well, okay, there's a few that are really good, there's a few that are not. I would just say the total number. There's 10, there's 12, there's whatever, right? But when you went there and saw it, you would see that not all of them have the same amount of time of development, right? So there's some that are a lot younger. Same with people. Like, we don't discount the existence of children because they're not mature. They're still human beings, right? They're still, hopefully, inshallah, we treat them like that, right? They're still human beings. They still have all the rights that we expect of any human being, any adult, right? So we have to, like, when you look at this, the believers, the new believers, they were new, but at the same time, they were still believers. So they took part in this battle, but because their faith was not firmly established like those people of Mecca earlier, the people, the first generation, or like those who are the Ansar in Medina, what happened? When the battle began, they didn't know how to react, and they literally just started to run away and started to flee. And it wasn't only them. Them starting to flee also caused some of those people who were seasoned veterans to also start to what? Run away. Are you guys with me here so far? The new Muslims who started to run, it caused some of those who were with them who were Muslim for a long time to also start to run. Okay? Now, what does that mean? What lesson do we take from that? Because that's a very interesting moment in the history of Islam. This moment where the chaos is ensuing in the beginning of the battle. What we take from this is that whether or not you realize it, and whether or not I realize it, it doesn't matter how safe and secure we feel in something, right? You could have been something for 20 years. You could have done something for your entire life. Your environment will still have an impact on you, whether or not you realize it. You know, there were people who had been with the Prophet ﷺ in Medina and with him in Mecca before that, and now they had been with him for 20 years. But the environment was so chaotic in that one single moment that they themselves were swept up in it like a wave. It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. I remember when I was really young, my parents, my mother's Egyptian, we were visiting Egypt, and we were visiting Iskandariya, Alexandria, which is a coastal town. And there was like a really, really urgent but sad report one morning that one of the Egyptian Olympic swimmers, like he was from the Olympic swimming team, he actually drowned. He drowned. He was training in the sea. He was swimming in the sea, and he actually ended up drowning, right? And I always remember thinking as a kid, like, it's so ajib that he's an Olympic swimmer, but he drowned in the sea. And I remember asking my mom, like, over and over again, how? Didn't he know how to swim? Because as a child, I was like 9 years old, 8 years old. You never think about things like the tide becoming strong, right? And the directionality of the tide on top versus underneath and how it can pull somebody under. These are things that you learn later, like in life. And so I remember being like, but how? He grew up his entire life swimming. How did he drown? How was he unable to stay above water? How did he pass away in that way? And there's just a reality to this. You can have such comfort and security in something your entire life. Oh, that's not me. I know who I am. I know my values. I know my principles. But when you're placed in an environment that challenges those principles and challenges those values, you're not completely invincible. You still have vulnerability, just like anybody else. And the longer that a person spends in that environment, the more vulnerable they'll find themselves, the less invincible they'll be, the more weaknesses they'll start to identify. And this happens, by the way, not only with bad things, it happens with, neutral things, the language we use. You hang around certain people, right? And you're going to start talking the way that they talk. I remember when I spent 2 weeks in England, I swear to God, there were some words that were coming out of my mouth that sounded like, Pierce Brosnan, like Hugh Jack. Like I was like, there were British accented words coming out of my mouth. And I was like, how is this happening? Because I'm surrounded for 2 weeks by people who that's the accent that they have. Anyone here don't really speak maybe like their parents' native tongue that well? Anybody? Like Arabic or Urdu or Hindi but then anyone ever go visit maybe some of their family back in their parents' home, and all of a sudden after 5 days, like you're able to like just go at it conversationally, no problem? Yeah, because your environment has a huge impact on you. And those again are like positive or neutral things, but this also happens at a value level, who you are. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said what? That al-maru ala dini khalilihi, that the person without a doubt is going to be on the way of their close friend. Whoever your close friends are, without a doubt, you're going to become just like that person. For better or for worse. A lot of times we use this hadith in a bad way. No, but for better or for worse, you spend good. Man, you're not that good, but you spend time with great people. That's my game plan anyways, right? You're not that good, but you spend time with great people. Guess what? You're like J.R. Smith. You're a world champion again. Like J.R. Smith's a world champion basketball player. How? Because he found his way onto LeBron's teams. That's just the way it is, right? No disrespect, right? But it's just the way it is. So when it comes to faith, if I'm struggling, if I'm not that good, but I want to be better, okay? And oftentimes we avoid hanging out with people that are better than us in anything, because it makes us deal with our own deficiencies. Like we have to come head on with those things, right? But if you embrace it, and if you say, you know what, like I'm not somebody that's very good in this aspect of my faith, but I'll still be around these people who are great in it. Watch, give yourself a week, give yourself 2 weeks, and you're going to start to see the way that you think, the way that you see the world will shift, right? And so this is what happened in the beginning of this battle. Now, the other side, the people, the Hawazin, the people of Hawazin in this battle, they did something really interesting. And this lesson teaches us a huge lesson about ego, okay? What did they do? They had their leader of all of these tribes, these 20,000 people, his name was Malik. He was a young person. He was young and he was very passionate about, we can call him like an Arabian nationalist. You know how we have like white nationalists in America now? So he was like an Arabian nationalist. He was very passionate about protecting Arabia from Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, from Islam. So it wasn't really any particular problem he had with it. It was more so, you're changing the way that we are, our system, our tribes, our cities, our nation, whatever. And so he took it upon himself to become the leader. And he was a young, charismatic, courageous leader. But oftentimes with youth, for everything that young people have regarding their courage and their energy, oftentimes there is a deficiency in wisdom. And he unfortunately did not take counsel very well. So one of the things that he did was he had an idea. And he said, if we just bring all these people to come fight on behalf of the Hawazin, behalf of the Arab tribes, behalf of, the Arab Peninsula against the Muslims, he goes, they'll fight, but there's really nothing that's going to motivate them. Because, again, he's passionate, but how can he guarantee the passion in fighting of everybody else? So what he did was he said, if you want to join this army, if you want to be on this team, then you have to bring all of your property and your family with you. You have to bring all of your property and your family with you. And while you're on the battlefield, they're going to be right behind you. Like they're going to be like 500 yards back. We're basically going to have all of our property and all of our animals and all of our belongings and all of our family, right? Family, wife, children, everybody's going to be back there watching us. Why? Because in his mind, he's thinking, okay, you know what? If I do this, then everybody will fight with their greatest ferocity because they know that their entire life is right there behind them, right? So imagine like if everything that you had was at stake. It's not like they were safe at home, right? If you lose this battle, the person that just defeated you is going to make their way right through you and get all your property, okay? So that was his idea. There was an elder who didn't like this idea very much because he said that this idea is too full of arrogance, it's too full of ego, meaning it hasn't considered what happens if you lose, right? You're only thinking about this is going to make us win, but what happens if you lose? If you lose, now you've completely decimated all of these tribes, all of these communities. They're gone because everybody has brought all their property to one place. It's almost like going all in and betting everything on one bet, right? I know that everyone right now is like, that's haram, and I agree with you, betting's haram, but we're talking theoretically, okay? It's like investing everything in one investment opportunity. There we go, right? Away from interest, inshallah, okay? So the elder council advisor told him, I don't think this is a good idea. I don't think it's a good idea because if you lose, at least if everybody had their property back in their village, then those people could like keep going with life. Yes, it would be tragic, it would be a loss, but they could keep, their life would still be intact. Now, if they lose, then like you bet it all, it's done. And this young, charismatic leader, Malik, he says, you know, he announces and in a very charismatic way, he says that if anyone here doesn't want to fight, doesn't want to do it this way, then I'll take my sword and I'll end my life right now. Again, like typical kind of dramatic, Arab drama. It's kind of a real thing, right? So he's like, I'll follow my sword right now. He says, I'll follow my sword right now in front of everybody. Like, if you don't want to fight, then I'm just going to end it now. And they're all like, yeah, we'll do it. He just riles them up. And the elder councilman is like, you're dumb. You're a fool, right? You don't realize it. And the people that you're talking to are just taken by your charisma. They don't realize it, but you're actually destroying everything, without thinking about it. So subhanAllah, while this battle is taking place, this is all happening. Now, what did we just say? We just said that the Hawazin tribe got the first punch. They landed the first punch. With all those arrows that were coming down, they landed the first punch. Now, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he, in the midst of this chaos, looked quickly to Al-Abbas, his uncle, and he said to him, because he was known for having a loud voice, so he said to him, call everybody, like scream and call everybody and let them know that we're here, to gather here, to gather here. So Al-Abbas, he screamed and called out loud, and everybody heard his voice, and they started to congregate, and they started to gather. And this became their rally cry. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ told everybody, I'm here, come back to me, I'm here, come back to me. And then the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he, at that moment, when everybody gathered, this is one of the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ, is that he took dust and he threw it in the direction of the Hawazin, and he said, may your faces be like full of dust, basically. May your faces be dusted. And the narration says that on the other side of the battle, when he did that, they all felt sand in their eyes. And that irritation lasted with them throughout the entire battle. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually addresses this moment in the Quran. What does he say? Allah ta'ala said that Allah granted you victory on the day of Hunayn when your great number kind of a'jabtakum, like it made you kind of vain. It gave you a sense of self-pride, like, oh wow, right? That a'jabtakum kathratakum, that your large number kind of made you feel good. So you strolled up to the battlefield, and then that first punch got you right on the jaw, and you didn't realize what was going on, right? You got humbled very quickly. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that your large number didn't help you, and all of a sudden when you got that first punch landed on your face, Allah ta'ala said what? That the earth, okay, وَضَاقَتْ عَلَيْكُمُ الْأَرْضِ, the earth kind of constricted upon you. And isn't this the case, by the way, when you're riding high and your pride is inflated and your ego is great, and then something horrible happens, don't you just feel like the earth is like kind of falling in on you? So Allah Ta'ala described it perfectly, as of course. And he said, and you turn back, fleeing, running away from people. But then he said, ثُمَّ أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ سَكِينَتَهُ عَلَى رَسُولِهِ وَعَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. But then, when you were humbled, Allah Ta'ala sent upon you this sense of tranquility. That pride pushes away tranquility like water versus oil. When a person is proud, they're actually incompatible with tranquility. They're worried about everything. How am I going to maintain this thing that's giving me pride? How am I going to protect it? That's why if somebody is proud of their wealth, whenever something starts to go south financially, they're rattled beyond what's normal. It's normal to be rattled. It's normal, right? If your company announces tomorrow that we're having layoffs, it's normal to be rattled. But if somebody's entire existence and ego and moment of pride is built upon their wealth, when their company announces layoffs, they are extremely affected by it, right? Anyone here like really invested into like your car or like your home or like something that's really of value to? We all have it. We all have it. For me, it's my espresso machine. Okay, my espresso machine. Musa, I'm not joking. Like Musa could take a golf ball or a baseball and throw it at our TV and it'd shatter it. And like, I would be, yeah, that kind of stinks, whatever. But like, okay, I don't really watch that much TV. Musa has scratched my car before. Okay, my cat has jumped on my car, and because he's fat and doesn't realize it, he slides down the hood, and what does he think? Oh, let me stick my claws out. And so literally there's lines down the hood. Go look at it. It's over there. Go look. You'll see. There's lines down the hood of my car. Right? It's not Adidas stripes. It's Sherlock. It's just my cat. It doesn't bother me. Allah didn't create me with that vulnerability. That's not my vulnerable point. But my espresso machine, okay, if Musa looks at it too long, I'm like, what do you want? Right? Like, so everybody has their vulnerabilities. Everybody does. Okay? And your pride, in a way, is attached to that. Your sense of self-worth, self-pride is attached to that. So when we have too much attachment to something and then it gets rattled, we lose all of our orientation, all of our sense of self. We don't know who we are anymore. And that's what happened. These people became incredibly invested in the pride of their numbers, which was an Arab tribal thing, right? They back before their Islam, they used to actually criticize the Muslims by saying, what? Your community is so small. You don't have anybody. You have nobody. Nobody's following you. They used to criticize the Prophet ﷺ. You have nobody, right? Your numbers are so small. So look at what Allah says, right? إِذْ أَعْجَبْتَكُمْ كَثْرَتُكُمْ. When you became obsessed with your numbers, when that thing crept back into your heart, then what? فَلَمْ تُغْنِي عَنْكُمْ شَيْئًا. But you realize your numbers didn't help you at all. So all of us have to do a deep dive internally. What is it that we have incorrectly built our pride on? What is it? What have we built our sense of self-worth on that's not actually what makes us worth anything? Right? Is it my degree? Is it my education? Is it my status? Is it my looks? What is it? Because all of those things are temporary. You know, my brother's a doctor, and I remember, like, we would be hanging out with the same group of friends, and so many people would tell him, like, oh, you're going to be so wealthy. You're going to be so rich. You know, the kind of specialization he's going into. Oh, you're going to be so incredibly wealthy. And you know what he'd say back to them? He'd be kind of a Debbie Downer. He would be like, yeah, if I go blind, then I can't really do it anymore. Or if I get into a car accident and I lose my ability to, like, use my hands or something, I can't do it anymore. And they would just be like, like, what do we say back to that? You know, like, we were just trying to compliment you based on something that we thought was what you took pride in, your income earnability. You're a doctor, you can earn a lot of money now. And my brother, who's, like, mashallah, an amazing person, he was like, no, that's not what I invest my pride into. Right? Because if I lose my ability to earn wealth in the way that I've trained to do so, it's just the way that it's going to suck, but that's the way that Allah Ta'ala has destined for me. Right? So we have to do a deep dive. Don't build your foundation upon something that's not stable. And here the Muslims did it with their numbers. But when you do build it upon your relationship with Allah, in every scenario you have sakina. ثُمَّ أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ سَكِينَتَهُ عَلَى رَسُولِهِ وَعَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. That Allah Ta'ala sent down sakina upon them in that moment, and they were able to regroup, and they were able to move towards the enemy, and they were able to win that battle. Okay, they were able to win that battle handily, actually. It was like a deafening win. It was like an amazing comeback victory for the Muslims there, right? But that lesson still stands, that numbers are not an indication of your success. The quality of your faith is, right? The quality of your faith is. Now, at the end of that battle, remember what the leader of the Hawazin did? He brought all of the property out. So what happens after two nations or two tribes fight is that whatever's left there is called the spoils of war. Whatever is left. So like shields, swords, all of that stuff. It's all left for the taking. And typically what happens is that it's taken, and then the Quran actually details this, that a portion of it is reserved for distribution for the state, like a tax, so that the state can keep, working, keep serving. But then a portion of it is distributed amongst the population of people who fought, people who are, eligible to fight, etc. So There was another short battle that actually happened immediately after this. But when the Prophet ﷺ finally gathered all the spoils and started to distribute the spoils, another very interesting moment happened. And this was at a place called Ji'rana. It's a very famous like valley. There's actually a masjid built there now to kind of commemorate that place. The Prophet ﷺ distributed the spoils of war of Hunain. And there were a lot. Why? Why were there a lot? Because what? Why were there more than normal? Because he made everyone bring everything. That guy was, his ego got the best of him. He was, by the way, one of the first to flee when the battle turned its tide. So his ego got the best of him, and he actually ended up causing the downfall of all these poor people, right? Now they lost all their stuff. So it's being distributed, and somebody is noticing that the Prophet ﷺ is distributing it more so. First of all, he's distributing it first to all of those newly accepted Muslims, Abu Sufyan and others, those who had just accepted Islam. And he gives them like large amounts. Okay? So I want you to imagine like Ramadan iftar at the masjid. They order like everyone's favorite. They order noodle wave, right? And then they call up and they're like, okay, all of those who are new to Islam, this is your first Ramadan. Come, we're going to give you like extra almond sriracha chicken or like extra, whatever. We're going to give you extra. And then everyone else gets a certain amount. So some people were okay with that because they were like, yeah, whatever the Prophet ﷺ does, I'm okay with it. No problem. He understands better. I may not get why he's doing that, but it is what it is, right? But there were some people from the Ansar, and this was what shocked the Prophet ﷺ, that when they heard this, they started to kind of talk. What do you think they were saying? What would you expect there to be said if there was a distribution happening and it seemed to be a little bit lopsided, especially to someone who's brand new to the community? What would you expect to hear from people? It's what? Fair or unfair? Huh? It's unfair. It's unfair. This distribution is not fair. Why? Yeah, we've been here longer, right? And they actually have a very good argument. What's their argument? We've been here longer. We've done more. The Ansar, like, we literally pledged our undying allegiance to you, Ya Rasulullah, for the last 8+ years, 9 years. And these people have been Muslim for like 3 weeks, and they're getting more than we get. And they actually were upset. So the Prophet, but none of them came to the Prophet ﷺ with it. He heard about it. He called one of the companions and he asked him from the Ansar, and he said, is this true? Is this being said? And he said, yes, Ya Rasulullah, it is. The Prophet ﷺ asked him, is this how you feel? He goes, no. I'm fine. Like, I don't, he goes, I'm one of them, but I'm just one person. Like, I feel okay, but I don't know how they all feel upset. So the Prophet ﷺ, he came to them and he sat with them and he actually asked, like, is it true that this is being said? And you know what's interesting? Again, what happened? It was noted in the books of Sirah that the people who were saying this were from the younger side of the community. That they weren't from the elder side. That they were from the younger people. So far we have a couple lessons here. So far in tonight's session, we have some lessons. Number one is what? Faith takes time to grow, and that the expectations of somebody who just converted to Islam or just re-engaged with their faith is not the same expectation as the one who what? Has been Muslim for 10 years or 20 years or their whole life. Okay. Number two is that we learn from the leader of the Hawazin and now the Ansar that youth and young age can sometimes be an obstruction for wisdom and can cause somebody to say and do what they later will regret. So the Prophet ﷺ, when he came to inspect this and he came to look at the situation and talk to the Ansar, he actually spoke to them and became like very emotional with them. And he said to them, he said, he actually told them, subhanAllah, he said, you can say anything you want. And we're going to finish here because I know we have Maghrib, everybody. He said, you guys all have an amazing argument. He actually, You can see that came to everybody else denied me. You can tell me that. Accepted me when nobody else. And then he said, you can tell me that I was rejected and you carry heavy burden of accepting me. You defended me. Quraysh was nonstop launching attacks on Medina. Why? Because I lived there. So he was, number one, he was empathizing with them, right? When you engage with somebody who has said something that bothers you, that hurts you, have you first taken the time to like empathize with why they would have said it in the first place? So he's actually aligning with them, and he's saying that you have a great argument. And he said, but I have to ask you just one question. Logically, I agree with you, but I have to ask you one question. He said, is it enough or is it not enough for you that while I give these people some animals, some property, some gold coins, some shields, some swords, this is like random stuff. In the end of the day, it sounds nice, but over an entire lifetime, what is it really? He says, are you really upset that I give these people a little bit of wealth, but I get to go home with you? These people have to go back and live wherever they do, but when it comes to living together, being home, being neighbors, he told them, is it not enough for you that I am your neighbor, I'm your brother, I'm from the Ansar? He said, if the entire world were to be on one side of the earth and the Ansar were sitting alone on the other, I would be with you. No kingdom, no palace, no wealth, no status, nothing could take me away from you. I'm with you. And he asked them, is that enough for you? Or would you rather have the wealth that I'm giving to these people to keep their hearts attached? What would you rather have? And the Ansar, when they heard this, it's like the words of the Prophet ﷺ just totally shook them to their senses. And when I read this hadith, it shakes me too. How many things of this world have I taken instead of taking my love of the Prophet ﷺ? How many times have I been bamboozled by that? Like tricked into thinking that something else was more valuable. When this happens to me often, and I have to fight it, it's like an internal battle, is praying in public. Praying in public, for me, is like, I'll just pray when I get home. I'll be cutting it close, but I'll just speak and I'll pray when I get home. And then I ask myself, like, man, subhanAllah, are you really that embarrassed of your Prophet? Like, are you really that embarrassed? After Jum'ah, I could go home and change, or I could just go out to the grocery store in my thobe. And I know what's going to happen. I live in Dallas, Texas. It's election season. I walk in the store. Hey, Moses. People call me Moses. Right? Which is a compliment, right? You know what's going to happen, right? Nothing compares to what happens to our sisters, but still, you know what's going to happen. When I pray in public, people honk, people stop, stare, look, all that kind of stuff. And initially, my heart is apprehensive about it. But then I have to remind myself, would you rather have some random stranger's perception of you be pristine and clear, that they think you're quote unquote just like them or normal or you're not? Or would you rather align yourself with your messenger and hold to your values and be like, you know what? It doesn't really bother me at all what you think of me. I'm praying to Allah and thanking him for the life that he's given me. It'll take me 5 minutes. I'm not bothering anybody. You can do what you like. You can stare as long as you want. Take a picture. It'll last longer. Right? So these are the micro moments from the seerah that, although they feel distant and disconnected, they're actually very, very practical and very relevant. And when the Prophet ﷺ said this to the Ansar, they were moved to tears and said, Ya Rasulullah, we've chosen you. We have no interest in anything that you've given away. We have no interest in whatever else that you've given. We don't care anymore. Forgive us. We were blinded. We saw the wealth and we thought for a second that we wanted it, but now we realize we have you, and that's much better for us. So we ask Allah Ta'ala to grant us that satisfaction. We ask Allah Ta'ala to make us satisfied with our faith, to make us satisfied with the Prophet ﷺ as our messenger, to make us satisfied with Islam as our deen, with Allah as our Rabb, and that we don't have any sense of discomfort or any sense of nervousness or shame or anxiety in representing that faith. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us thabat and firmness in our hearts when it comes to our faith, when it comes to our relationship with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from the ego that lies within us, from the youthful, charismatic, unwise soul. We ask Allah ta'ala to grant us wisdom and to grant us patience and the ability to do what is best, even if it's not to do what we want. We ask Allah ta'ala to grant us that more and give us tawfiq. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته, everybody.